one story that is about my dad. Now, my dad was not a perfect person, but it's funny. Just like Saturday morning, we left to drive here. It took us a couple of days, and I went for a run. And we live about 2 blocks from the Willamette River. It's pretty nice, really. It was really nice. And so I ran across the bridge there, and all of the fishermen were out in the boats right around the bridge. I don't know why, but there must be a lot of fish right around this Selwood Bridge. And they're always there. And it reminded me of the pandemic. During the pandemic, this time of year, you could practically have walked across the river. There were so many people fishing because they couldn't go to work. So it made me think of my dad. My dad had a lot of faults. He had one weakness in particular that was a couple of them, but he really taught me a lot. And the biggest thing, he taught me how to be patient. My mom was not patient at all. She was loving, but she had no patience. And I learned it completely from my father. And I just remember him being so relaxed in tough situations. Now, a big reason he was relaxed in tough situations is he had a general belief that everything in the world was always going to work out great. I mean, he believed everything would work out, even when things looked like, things are looking pretty tough now, Dad. And he'd be like, it's all going to work out. He was just one of those kids. He was, he was a kid not old enough to go to war during World War II. And he just came out of that thinking the worst thing has happened. Things are going to be good from here on in. And he just totally believed it deep in his soul. Now, I was a worrier when I was a kid. I was like the 4th kid in the family, and I was like 5 or 6 years younger than my nearest sibling. So I was a worrier. I worried about things I like to plan ahead, and I still really love to plan ahead. And it's one of the reasons I really liked being invited here, because Rachel loves to plan ahead as well. And so I found out all the information several times, and I knew what to do. Well, I love that kind of thing, but Dad, he didn't plan ahead. So he usually had about $20 in his pocket. And he had enough change for maybe the parking meter. He always wanted to have parking meter change and about $20. So he didn't plan ahead, and it made me very nervous. But my mom had total faith in him, total faith. Well, when I was 16 years old, almost 17, that summer before I was 17, I had big plans. I had one thing on my mind when I was that age. And I bet some of you men, when you were 16, had the same thing on your mind. I had somebody guess this last week. You wanted to get some wheels, right? You needed wheels. I needed somewhere to get around. So that summer, I didn't really have any money saved up because I played sports, baseball and football. And so I was going to work a bunch of jobs. So I worked for my dad's office. Back in those days, they didn't have cell phones, so they needed somebody to answer the phone during lunch. So I worked about an hour and a half every day answering the phones in the office. And then I mowed some lawns. I helped my brother put up his firewood. He was 11 years older than me. He already had a family, and I helped him with that. We did... I worked at my best friend's dad had this security business. He had about 20 trucks, and I helped wash the trucks. And I worked all summer. Of course, I did still go to the movies and played baseball and everything, and worked out for football. So at the end of the summer, though, I had saved and saved and saved. And I had the whopping sum of $300. Now, I knew I wasn't going to be able to get a new car. I wasn't, I had planned ahead, and I knew that new cars cost a lot. But I thought, I live in Coos Bay, Oregon, and there's a lot of used cars around. Maybe I can get some rusty piece of junk that still works, So and in those days, now you parents, you can tell the kids about this. Back in those days, the best place to find a used car was not on the internet, because there wasn't such a thing. It was in a newspaper. They were these paper things. They had news that came, and you'd open them up, and they had all kinds of, and in the back of the thing, there was a thing called the classified ads. Now, in my local paper, our local paper in Coos Bay, Oregon, is called The World. No self-esteem problem there, huh? Yeah, I mean, so I looked in the world, and there was nothing in the world that I could afford. Not on 4 wheels, but I thought, hey, I'll think out of the box. I'll get something with 2 wheels, maybe. Mom wouldn't like it, but it would work out, you know. And so I looked for a used motorcycle. No motorcycles in the world that I could afford either. So I was going to have to think out of the box. And I thought, well, maybe I can get a scooter. I had seen one in a magazine. Actually, it was a Boy's Life magazine. I know it's a fact. I'd seen a scooter in there, and I thought, maybe I could get a scooter for $300. And so I asked around all my friends and all my friends' parents. I asked them if they knew of a scooter, and no one had even heard of a scooter being in the county of Coos. So I was out, and I was like, I guess I'm not going to have something. I'll be riding a bike around again. But my mom, I came home from football practice. It was getting close to, you know, the time for the school to start again. And my mom said, maybe your dad can help you get one. And, you know, at 16, almost 17, and your dad doesn't plan ahead a lot. You're kind of like, I don't know, Dad is kind of, and he can do things that are a little bit off. And he had a different way of thinking about things. Well, now, I guess it's time I told you, he liked to gamble. He didn't gamble that much, but if he had a little extra money, he always, of course, he had that attitude. Things are going to work out. Things are going to go well. So he would go to the Elks Club where he was a member, and he had this one little group of pals that they would get together there, and they would gamble. And so I didn't really want to talk to my dad about money. You know what I mean? So Mom said, no, your dad, he always seems to come through. And I trust him. I feel safe. I think I'd feel safer if you went with your dad to do this. And I was like, I wouldn't feel safer. But the next day, after football practice, he picked me up. And I got in the car. And at that age, we weren't close, but we were earlier and later. And I got in the car, and we had our usual conversation. He said, hey. And I said, hey, how's football practice? It's okay. We drove along. We're here. I jumped out of the car immediately. Now, where we went was Harris Honda in Coos Bay. The Harris family had this place right at the Y. It was Harris Y Marina, where they had a bunch of boats around because the dad liked to boat. And his sons liked motorcycles, so they had the Honda dealership. That was before the Honda was a car. Back then, you'd say Honda, that meant a motorcycle. So anyway, they went in there, and right up in front of it, there was a yellow scooter. And I thought, wow, and I ran up to the front, and it was yellow, and it was $375. This was a dealership. I thought, no, there's no way I'm going to be able to get it. It's not going to be no good at all. So I said, Dad, we might as well just go. It's $75 more than I have. I can't afford it. In Oregon, there's no sales tax, by the way. Just a little information. So there's no, I'm not going to be able to get this. Let's go. And he goes, no, let's go in. So my dad goes in, and Mr. Harris is there. And Mr. Harris had been in the Korean War, and he had both his legs. They didn't work, but they were stiff as boards and bound together. And he had 2 crutches that he used all the time. He had these big muscles. The kids, we loved Mr. Harris. He would go to a sporting event, and he'd be banging those crutches. He could race people. If you were running, he could almost beat you on his crutches. He was so fast, and so he impressed us. He would race people up the grandstand at the football game. Anyway, he would bang on those, and I knew him because he had 2 kids in school, 1 year older, 1 year younger. And I also knew, though, that Mr. Harris was one of Dad's gambling buddies. And I thought, oh no, what's going to happen here? So we get in there, and my dad says, and he comes out of the back, Mr. Harris, and he says, hey, Brecke, how you doing? He says, yeah, hey, Harris, how much is that scooter outside, that used scooter? He says, well, the price is right on it, Brecke. And he goes, yeah, I know, but what's the real price? My dad, $375, Brecke. He goes, yeah, I'll tell you what. My dad says, I'll give you $275. Mr. Harris, his eyes light up. He's like, oh. He says, all right, how about $350? My dad says, $275. Oh, okay, how about $345? $275, my dad says. All right, how about $330? $275. I'm looking around the shop. There's all these items. I don't even know what they're helmets right there in the front. And then we're looking around the shop. I don't even know what most of these parts are, but I'm like, oh, I don't want to watch this whole thing, but I can't help it. We're the only people in the store. So he says, all right, Brecke, you are a terrible negotiator. We're supposed to meet in the middle, you know. And he says, $275. All right, how about $325? $275. He's like, oh, Brecke, all right, I'll tell you what, $300. Dad has done it. And inside I'm going, yeah. And on the other hand, no, I'm being cool, you know. But inside I'm going, Dad did it. He did it. He goes, $275. Oh, what's he doing? He's going to blow the deal. And he's like, Brecke, I'm telling you, you're the worst negotiator I've ever met in my life. He's like, $275. He goes, forget it, Brecke, forget it. And he starts to walk away. And I'm like, Dad has blown it. I had it. And he says, my dad says, tell you what, I'll flip you for it. Flip me for it. He comes back out. What do you have in mind? What do you have in mind? He says, I'll tell you what, if we win the flip, it's $275. But if you win the flip, $350. I don't, Dad doesn't have $50 in his pocket. I know he doesn't have $50. He never had $50 in his pocket. But he says, all right. Well, believe it or not, it took us about 10 minutes to find a coin because he didn't want to open the cash box. So finally, I find a nickel in my pocket, and we huddle up in the middle of the showroom area. There's kind of a big blank area with a concrete floor, and we huddle up. Mr. Harris is there. It's like the beginning of a football game. I had been the captain a couple times, and we were up there, and my dad, Mr. Harris, and I have the coin, and Mr. Harris says, okay, you're going to flip it up, and then you call it in the air, let it land on the ground, and we'll see what it gets. I said, okay. I flip it up in the air, and it goes up and up and up. And I go, tails, because tails never fails. And remember that. And it lands on the ground, and it hits right on the edge and starts to roll. I'm like, my insides are like, so, and it's rolling, and we're following it along slowly, the three of us, just like it was like a little huddle, you know, and we're going along, Mr. Harris is following. It starts to go down the aisle towards the front of the store. It's almost to that mat right there by the front of the store. It starts to go around, and around, and around, and around, and around. And finally, it gets a little smaller and a little smaller and a little smaller, and then, boom, tails. Dang it, Brecke. He goes back to the back. I'll write it up. And I go, Dad, you did it. You did it. I have it now. I have $25 left over. That's great. That's great. And he goes, yeah, now you can buy a helmet. And he points, helmet sale, $25. Huh. I hadn't planned ahead about that, but Dad had. And that's the story.